So I read the geospatial and GIS press all the time, and I'm struck by a question that often comes up. Do you actually need a geospatial strategy? Again, quite a lot of stuff written about this, so let's cover it today. I think it's a wrong term, actually, to start with. It should be a GIS strategy, not a geospatial strategy, because it is truly kind of the reposition of GIS. GIS has always been that map-centric world. Again, repeating old conversations, ESRI and other GIS companies have sort of planted themselves in geography departments, and as people leave those departments, they apply those tools within mostly public sector and to some degree infrastructure. So you've got really a world which has been super successful for GIS in terms of building a community, but it's now kind of locked into particular parts of organizations. Dare I call it niche? In some ways it's sort of seen that way. I think that as we explore the expanding world of geospatial beyond GIS, we can learn from where GIS has been and some of the sort of challenges of GIS, but needing a geospatial strategy, I would say, the rest of the geospatial world probably doesn't need. GIS needs it, but just geospatial doesn't. What geospatial needs to do is to start thinking differently about it, how it tells its story. Again, it's often something that the GIS folks lament, the fact that they can't describe what they do, so they resort to calling themselves map makers. But if we think about geospatial, which is location-based data, and we link it back to its roots, well, I would say to some degree its roots are somewhat false, that it's perceived as geography. It's certainly an element of geography, but if we look at geography and break that word down, geo means earth. The second part of that word, raphi, is actually, I think they're both Latin words, is actually the study of or description of. So it's really the description of the earth. And again, location is a part of that, but it's not really what is at the heart of geography. In fact, geography is itself a sort of dot connecting discipline. But I think that if we relate to real world context, decisions made based on real world context, that's really the heart of what geospatial and geography is. And I think that's how we have to reframe the conversation. Instead of focusing on data and technology, we really need to focus on outcomes, the kind of things that I begin to see. But if you're talking to an insurance company, it's about reducing risk. Maybe it's about real-time data, maybe it's about wildfires, but we really need to kind of relate the data and technology that we know and work with to the business outcomes, starting with the business outcomes. So I think reframing the conversation in a different way to how GIS has framed itself and is kind of stuck with, at least for now, is important. The opportunity really lies, as I've mentioned before, and really it's the heart of what I talk about with Geospatial 2.0, is this kind of convergence of geospatial, spatial computing, artificial intelligence, and in many ways real-time data. I have a big sort of focus on real-time data, since if we can bring in real-time data feeds, process them with AI, we much more quickly can make good, accurate decisions using this technology and data. So I think that this convergence is really, really important. And some people ask me about the spatial computing piece of that. Spatial computing at its heart is really bringing the real and digital worlds together. So it's combining those worlds. Whatever interface you actually use, it's really bringing those worlds together. So again, inherently geographic. The data behind that is inherently potentially geospatial. So we've moved into a new world. It's a paradigm shift. The GIS world certainly needs a GIS strategy to get itself out of where it's locked into at the minute, and that's the GIS department and isolated departments. But geospatial more broadly can be presented as an enterprise solution that everyone should be using as part of their business solution stack. So I think that we, as a broader geospatial world, need to be thinking in those terms and widen the conversation to bring in what is a very, very big world that doesn't really understand nor use in the way we know they can use geospatial. So there's my today talk. I'll be really interested in anyone's perspectives on this, and I'm certainly not meaning to be critical of GIS. I'm just really putting the point across that GIS is part of a much bigger whole. And I'm, even though GIS remains relevant to me, I'm really part of the much bigger whole, sort of thinking differently about how geospatial could go more broadly and be applied and used by everybody. So that's today's talk. Thanks for watching. So that's a very weird title for a talk. What can geospatial learn from GIS and Apple? Where is Sheehan going today with this one? Well, I'm going to go back to my topic on community building. I think it's a really important topic that is really not discussed at all. And to me, it's central to the Geospatial 2.0 conversation. A lot of attention is focused on the technology. A lot of attention is focused on the wow of 3D and digital twins and all that good stuff. But truly, that stuff's useless unless you have an audience for it and people that want to buy it and use it. So I think the emphasis needs to be on the front end, the commercial side of things. Again, I'm a bit of a broken record on that one. But I really want to talk about, in terms of the GIS world, and particularly Apple community building. So this is the network effect thing. Look up Metcalfe's law if you wonder what that actually means. So what can we learn from GIS? Let's start there. GIS, and let's focus on ESRI, the genius of ESRI in their early days. They put their software for free in universities. That is how they built their community. A brilliant, brilliant strategy. Continues to this day to be a brilliant strategy. That's how they planted the seed, and I really want to talk about that piece of the puzzle, because if you're going to focus on community building, which I believe is super important in this evolving world of geospatial, the first thing and the most difficult thing is planting that seed. We all know, if you're a gardener, I'm sort of a wannabe gardener, when I try and grow something from seed, putting that in the soil and getting that seed to pop out and see that green piece coming up is by far the most difficult thing. The watering of that seed, the next phase, which is getting that green piece to grow, is far easier. So planting the seed's difficult. ESRI planted the seeds by putting their software into universities for free. Apple, slightly different use case. Apple back in the day did a number of things. If anyone remembers, I think it was 1984 when they did their famous Super Bowl ad. And it was basically appealing to, I would say, mavericks, to those that are sort of the rebels. I think they use that word, rebels. And some of my heroes were included in that, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, most notably. People that broke the mold, people that were trying to push boundaries and not be pulled back by how things have always been done. So that was kind of the Apple message. They also provided subsidized computers to universities. There's the ESRI model. And that was very much focused in the creative departments. Actually, I think it was schools. It may have been universities and schools. But anyway, it was very much a focus on the creative department. So they were really trying to appeal to those that were trying to think differently, those who were thinking out of the box, those who were rebels, but those that were creative. And that's how they built their community off of that. And that was the seed that set things in motion. Again, they've done all sorts of things to maintain that, to water that seed, to keep that community loyal and as a community. But there's two examples of this, of planting seeds. To me, that should be the focus of this evolution of geospatial beyond GIS. If we look at today's opportunity, where we are today actually is really, we're in a world where technology is changing really quickly. So we're in a time of change. And we're in a time of uncertainty as well. So people feel that there is this, there's a new world that's emerging. They don't really understand what it is. They don't understand what the impact that's going to have on them, but they want to grow into that world. So there's interest in this world. I think if we look at the world that within the geospatial context, I mean, GIS, again, not to knock GIS because it has an important place in that world, but GIS tends to be slow, siloed, a little conservative, sort of legacy based. I think there's people that are in that world that are looking beyond that, and there's also people that are coming in from the outside that are wondering, what's this geospatial thing? So I do think it's a time of opportunity. I do think it's a time where we can actually build community. The question is, how do you do that? I think that traditional marketing is dead. I use that word cautiously, but old school marketing, as people still do it, is really not the way to do things. I think it's still, marketing is focused on trying to sell something and promote oneself instead of building community. I think marketing and the whole game of business development is all about one-way conversations. Let me tell you, it isn't about a two-way conversation. That's a community exercise. If you're in a two-way conversation, that is a community, and that's where people feel engaged in that community. So I think that's really important. I always keep in mind Simon Sinek's start with why. What is your purpose? What's that shared purpose? I think that some of the ways, let's talk about social media. A lot of people are focused on social media. I spend time on social media. This is going out on social media. Social media is a one-way conversation. I hope people engage with me on this conversation. That's my goal, but it's one way. You've got greedy algorithms within LinkedIn and all the other social media platforms, which are really trying to keep people on the platform. So it's quick attention, dopamine driven. It's not a way to build a community. Now, there are ways to do it in social media, but it's not really designed for that. So we've got fleeting attention, we've got a one-way content flow, we've got mediums that are not really designed for building community. But I think that there has to be more thought given to how you plant a seed, and I'll continue this conversation in future talks. But again, it's easy to nurture a community. Again, if we go back to GIS, I mean, the ESRI conference is a great way that ESRI nurture that community, keep watering it, keep people engaged, keep people feeling like they're part of the bigger whole. Brilliant on their part. But the seed initiation piece is still difficult. I still think the watering piece is easy, but my focus in this talk is how do you plant that seed and how do you get that seed to grow? And Apple and ESRI are great examples of how they've done that. I think the challenge that you've got as a geospatial professional looking broader than GIS, this expanding world of geospatial, is how do you do that? So that's my talk for today. Love your feedback. And for today, thanks for watching. So I wanted to talk about my favorite topic, which is artificial intelligence, and my belief that artificial intelligence, geospatial AI, as our industry likes to call it, will be a game changer for our industry. I realize that AI overall is going to change a lot, but I think in geospatial there's a very specific place that AI is going to apply itself to take, as I've got in the title, is from specialist tools to an audience which is everybody. And again, I've argued for most of my career that fundamentally geospatial data shouldn't be in small departments focused on maps. It should be broadly used as business data and within business tools. So what are we talking about here when we talk about AI? I think today the application of geospatial AI, or GeoAI as some people are kind of branding it, I think I'm much more, if I'm going to use the term, geospatial AI is my favorite. It's really being applied in some ways in the old paradigm. So if we think about machine learning, we get machine learning embedded behind a map. So we have a map and we use machine learning in the background to do something special for us, and then we get something back on the map. Same way with generative AI, and remember, I'll talk about this in a second, machine learning and traditional machine learning and generative AI are different, even though generative AI kind of falls under that umbrella that is machine learning. The generative AI application of it is, again, often it starts with a map and asking questions of the map. So the application of AI at the minute and geospatial AI is kind of part of the old paradigm, as I like to call it. But let's just break down what machine learning and generative AI is before we jump into what I think is the future, how AI is going to change our whole industry. If we think about machine learning is supervised learning on labeled data. What does that mean? We sometimes think about identification of signs, for example, on a road. So we train the algorithm, the machine learning algorithm, to recognize a particular sign. Every time it sees a stop sign, it'll recognize that stop sign. So it's provided with labeled data that says this is a stop sign, and it learns that. You've seen a classic kind of dog versus cat training in machine learning world, where at some point it can actually predict, oh, that's a dog, that's a cat. So that's sort of classic machine learning. It's things like land classification, object detection, object recognition. That's the kind of thing that machine learning is good for. It's really good for predicting stuff. but it's narrow and it's very task focused. So what's generative AI? It's models trained on both labeled data in the same way that machine learning is, and unlabeled data. So if you look at ChatGPT, that's been trained on the data across the whole internet. Now that's not necessarily labeled data, but it's been trained on that data. And what generative AI does is it can generate new things, new outputs, and we'll often see, you have a conversation with it, and it comes out from a text-based thing with an answer to a question, and it gets creative in some of its answers. You can create an image from nothing, you can create a video, all those sort of things. So it can actually create something from nothing. So it kind of moves us from sort of detection and prediction to sort of creativity. So I think if one uses an analogy, the machine learning is more of sort of the toolbox, but it's an automated toolbox. So I think sometimes I've described QGIS and GIS in general as a bunch of tools. You've got all these different tools, you have to learn how to use those tools, but they're all there. So, again, using the analogy, it's like you've got a hammer and a screwdriver and all those things. That's essentially how a lot of these GIS tools are and platforms are. Really what machine learning does, it automates some of those tasks. I'm simplifying it, but that's what it does. So again, very task specific. Generative AI is more like creating the workbench. So it's it can choose the right tools for you. It can choose the right sequence. It can get to understand the flow of what you're doing. It can explain results. So there's more of it's less task specific, and it's learning things, and it's sort of a helper to you in every single way. So I think that we're in, like I've said in many of my talks, I just mentioned that world of the old paradigm. The old paradigm is kind of, map centric. Within geospatial, I think that there are really where we're moving to, and I think that generative AI is the piece which will be the transformational piece within the geospatial AI world. My belief is that generative AI will apply itself in 3 places. So there'll be a natural language front end, like an interpreter, and you can think of ChatGPT like that. So we can ask a question. Again, it could be a text question like ChatGPT, and it's going to understand that question, and it's going to know the right the right algorithm or algorithms to call to actually process that. So what it will do is it will pass information onto a sort of a middle layer, if you like, another layer of generative AI. And I think that's really, we could call that sort of the geospatial knowledge engine, but it's kind of run by, again, generative AI. And it's more sort of the orchestrator of things is where generative AI will form in that middle piece. It will know what to call. Things like machine learning hooks, it will know I need to call that machine learning algorithm to do this and that one to do that. So spatial reasoning it will do. Data connections like GeoParker, it'll call those type of things. So a lot of orchestrating on the analytical piece, but it's the orchestrator in that middle piece. And then the final piece is going to be that output piece, which is sort of the presenter. So again, generative AI will know what is the right way to present the answer to the question. So does it call an API? Does it tap into Cesium for 3D? Does it tap into ESRI for a 2D map, for example? Does it use a digital reality engine or does it a gaming engine, for example? So the output that is presented back to the user is going to be, generative AI is going to know what the most appropriate output is. So I think that's the future of geospatial. I think that's the paradigm shift that we're in the midst of. I still think we're focused on the old world, which is again still 2D map centric when it comes to AI. But I think we're rapidly moving to a world where we've really got those 3 pieces of generative AI, the interpreter, the orchestrator, and the presenter. And at every level, generative AI is going to know how to interpret the question, who to ask, which algorithms to ask to actually do the analytics, and then how to best present that output that's appropriate for what the user's is asking for and wanting. So it's a really exciting world. I'm really intrigued by it. I think generative AI is a massive game changer, and it is going to transform our industry. So anyway, for today, thanks for watching.